Okay, so we got a bunch of stuff we're getting through today. We're gonna I one more thing I wanted to do about Genesis, about Bereshit, and then talking briefly about Noah. We're talking about Shabbat, starting our discussion about Shabbat. Hopefully, Tolushkin chapter 2 on free will. Hopefully, Veahafta. I probably won't get through everything today, but that's what we're doing. By the way, I feel terrible. I didn't email you guys about what to read. So for next week. Please read Lech Lecha in the Torah, Greenberg chapter 1, that's about Shabbat, and Telushkin chapters 3 to 5, that's about free will. Today we're covering chapter 2, which is free will. Tomorrow, next week, chapter 3 to 5. And since we're starting to talk about Shabbat, I know some of you have places that you do participate in for Shabbat dinner. I know, you know, some of you have been to my place for Shabbat dinner and services. But if you have not been somewhere for Shabbat dinner, please try to find somewhere where you can have a Shabbat dinner experience because we're learning from books, from videos, but none of it's quite the same as being there in person. So I'd like everyone to try to look for that if they haven't had that kind of experience. So, um, anything anybody want to share from last week before we jump in? No? Okay. So we were talking last week about um, Bereshit. And whoops, um, sorry, I'm on the wrong chapter. I apologize. We're talking about creation and Bereshit. Bereshit, of course, is both the word for Genesis, the first book of the Torah, and it's also the word for the first parsha, the first chapter. Um, so you guys know that the what the Christians call the Old Testament, we call what do we call it?
The Torah, the five books of Moses.
Okay, good. So the Old Testament we call Tanakh, right? That includes Torah, it includes prophets, includes what's called Ketuvim. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place there. So Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah is Torah. Nevi'im are the prophets. Ketuvim are the writings. So when the Christians say New Testament, that's our Old Testament. That's Tanakh for us. Um, the Torah, right, is the five books of Moses, and then it's divided into five books. Anybody know the five books? So I know some people here know five books in English.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Good. So in English, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Anybody know them in Hebrew? So it's good to learn. It's Genesis is Bereshit, Exodus is Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, and we'll be using those terms all throughout. So Bereshit is the first book. It's also the first section, right? We read a different section of the Torah every week, and it's broken up into, I think, 54 sections. Some weeks we double up if we have to. And each week is called a parsha. So this week, I mean, in synagogues, I think we're just about to begin the book of Exodus, but us together, we're in Parsha Bereshit. So I wanted to talk about the soul, the creation of the human soul, and how humans are different in the Torah. Um, okay, so we are on the sixth day of creation. God makes the animals. And if you look at the animals, it says, God said, let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, wild beasts of every kind. So from the text, what are the animals made of? See where I am? So where are the animals coming from?
The earth.
The earth. The earth. Yeah. So traditionally, this is seen as like animals having kind of purely physical, not necessarily spiritual nature. Um, I think the truth might be a little more complicated. I think there is an idea that animals have some form of spirituality, just not quite the same as humans. But then if you look at humans, it says, God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, the things that creep on earth. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female. Um, so, what does this say about the nature of people? Right? Because none of this was said about animals, right? So clearly, the Torah sees us as different than the animals.
Created in the image of God, right? I
So we're
mean,
in the image of God. Yeah. What does that mean?
To me, it means, a soul, consciousness.
Okay.
Well, not just consciousness, but, a soul.
So those are
More,
good. Those are two good options. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
just
Actually,
more feelings and, more, more like God, not physically looking like God, but per se, but just,
Right.
more like Him.
Good. Good. So you've said at least three really good things. So first of all, clearly it doesn't mean physically looking at God, like God, right? God doesn't have an image. So it's kind of weird that it even says the image of God, because what the heck is that? So you said at least two more interesting things that I want to unpack. One of them is maybe it's our soul. So you still can kind of delve in. Okay, what is our soul? What's the nature of our soul? But so maybe there's something spiritual about us that animals don't have. That's our soul. There is a Kabbalistic idea that there's different levels of souls. So let me share a white screen. Mm, They changed all the things on this, and I don't know how to share a white screen. Here we go. Um, I'm sorry, they changed. I don't know how to find a whiteboard on this thing. Shoot. Okay, I'll just write on the screen. So, okay. So there is a Kabbalistic idea that there are at least four levels of souls. Um, actually, I'm going to do three. Yeah, ruach, nefesh, ruach, neshama, and then actually five levels. Okay, five levels, call four levels. So they say nefesh is just life force. Even the plants have that. Ruach is the animal life force. Neshama is the divine soul that we have, and Chaya is just like a place where our soul interfaces with God. So it's the so Chaya and Yechida just are kind of there's a continuum between our soul and God, and our soul is just an extension of divine energy into the universe. So or they say our soul is actually a spark of God. So these kind of Chai and Yechida can kind of are it's like a ladder between us and God. So um but going back to the text, okay, we said our image could be having a soul. What does the soul give us that animals don't have?
our connection with God.
Okay, so option so yeah, our connection with God. Any other thoughts what it could give us? Yeah, Melina, please.
Very well.
Options. Sorry,
Good.
not options. Options to decision. I want to say decision
Yes.
making.
Yes. So both of you, so you and I think it was Caitlin who also said free will. Yes. So in other words, cats can't intentionally decide to do A or B, and they can't intentionally decide to become better, right? They don't, my cats are lovely. They're truly lovely, but they don't really decide, okay, I'm going to become more disciplined and stop stealing tuna from mom's lunch. Right. Yesterday, I had tuna on my wife's salad, and I put Tupperware over it, and I put a huge squash on top of the Tupperware to prevent the cat from getting in. He was pushing it aside with his paw, trying to get at the tuna, understandably, right? They don't decide to be good or bad. They just, there's no conscious thought. So, and I think another thing Jessica said was consciousness. Um, So there's no consciousness, there's no abstract thought. According to Maimonides, maybe the image of God here is abstract thought. Like animals think, right? They think, they sort of think, they are hungry, but they can feel pain and pleasure, but they don't have abstract thought. Um, okay, when it says they shall rule the fish of the sea, and then later on it says, be fertile, God blesses them and says, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, rule the fish of the sea. What do you think it means to rule the fish and the birds and the animals?
I think it means to take charge of them, like, uh, kind of like the pecking order, I guess.
So if you say the pecking order, then that means that, I mean, pecking order is like we get, we get
It's
to
something
take,
from them.
yeah, that's kind of, to me, that's the
But
implication. Yeah,
so I guess that's where it's a little confusing because we didn't start to consume animals or use them for things like clothing or anything
it's
until
true.
after they were dispelled from the Garden of Eden. So,
Right. So it cannot
yeah,
mean you cannot mean you can eat them. Right.
not yet, according to this.
So
So,
what does it mean to rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the
I think
cattle?
it introduces the concept of stewardship. We're not the true
Yes,
masters.
stewardship, right? Nowadays, when I think of kings, often I think of people who are incredibly rich and take money from people in without actually working. I mean, that's when I think of the British monarchy, certainly that's what I think of. But I think the idea of a steward is a much better, you know, concept, which is we're being put in charge of something beautiful. There is a midrash. So midrash, can anybody define midrash? You guys remember what a midrash is? So a midrash is like a story that's not in the Torah, but it kind of explores what a meaning in the Torah. So there's a story that when God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, God takes them around for a walk and says, "Be careful with my creation, because if you mess it up, there's no one else that's going to be able to fix it." So we're supposed to be stewards of the earth. Absolutely. One other very, very interesting, funky thing in this verse. God created humankind in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female. So, what's weird about this verse? Ah, shoot, sorry. Do anything weird about this verse to you? God
Well,
created
I was
creating it
thinking
in.
that if our soul is a part of that consciousness that was created on the first day,
Yes,
then that means that Adam and Eve were there at creation. So the question is, there's a duality that has to be created by
yeah,
necessity.
yes. So somehow we have to go from it to them, right? Does everybody see? We have here we have it and we have them. So how do we go from it to them? And them here is not right. Them here is not the gender neutral; it's the plural. So how do we go from singular to plural? Does anybody know?
when he made Eve,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah. So in other words, here we have Adam and Eve being created together as a unit, and here we have Adam and Eve being separate. So what the Midrash says, anybody know how the Midrash explains this? That Adam was created du partsufim with two faces. Adam and Eve were originally one being with two faces, male and female together. The first Adam, when Adam was all alone, was not male and female. And then God split this first Adam that had Adam and Eve in half, and all of a sudden it became Adam and Eve. Yeah, Melina.
Can I share something a little bit related to our culture?
Yeah,
Actually, I remember when I was in school, we have learned that Adam was like one creature, and then from his here, how do we call it? From his kidney, I guess, from his kidney part, God has made Eve. This is
good,
not correct, here, Rav David.
good. So let's go to that. Let's go to that. Um, so first of all, before we go to that moment, um, well, I'm going to go to that moment, but let's go let me get there. Okay, so um, there's one other interesting thing. If this first Adam was male and female, then what does that say about the image of God?
That it's both male
Yeah,
and
that
female.
God's both. Yes, that God is both male and female. Yeah. So people who say that the Bible depicts God as a male are just this they're wrong. This God is male and female here. Um, it's interesting though, because later on we have kind of male aspect of God, female aspect of God. They seem to be in some ways separate as well. The mystics kind of are trying to unify them. So it's kind of interesting how the male and female get separated in both humans and gods. But again, God. But I want to go forward a little more, and I promise, Melina, I'll get to where you were asking about. Okay, God formed human from the soil's humus. So just like animals were formed from the earth, blowing into his nostrils the breath of life. So what's this breath of life?
And the God's souls.
Yeah. So that's the
The God's
divine soul.
breath. Sorry.
Yeah.
The God's
So, but
breath.
no, but yeah, it is our soul. Our soul is God's breath. There's this notion that when, according to Jewish law, if I can no longer breathe on my own, I'm not alive, and life starts when I can breathe. So by Jewish law, life starts when a baby takes its first breath. It does not start in the womb. And it ends when I can no longer breathe on my own.
So how does that, I'm sorry, how does that
Yeah.
relate then to like being on mechanical ventilation in the hospital?
Yeah. So it definitely comes in there. Um, it's a big question, right? If I'm on a mechanical ventilator, is it my soul? Do I have my soul, or can I say, well, I'm not breathing on my own, therefore. So what they do if they want to donate, let's say I want to be a kidney donor or an organ donor, and someone is not breathing on their own, they can, according to some opinions, not necessarily all, but if you unplug this person from the ventilator because the ventilator is preventing them from dying, you're not allowed to prevent someone from dying. So in Jewish law, you can't hasten someone's death, but you also can't delay it. So if someone is dying and you're delaying it, you're not allowed to do that. So if you take the position that the ventilator is preventing a person from dying, you can remove them from the ventilator. Um, if they are unable to breathe on their own, if they stop breathing, then you can harvest their organs. You can't do, I think it's a little more limited for organ donation because sometimes for organ donation, they will take someone who's just on a ventilator but brain dead. It gets a little more complicated Jewishly doing that. Um, okay, but this is the source for that definition of. So then Adam gets lonely, as Melina said. It's not good for the human to be alone. I'll make a fitting counterpart. They try all the animals, it doesn't work. God cast a deep sleep upon the human. While he slept, God took one of his what? So let's look at translations here. Some of you are new to this class. This is the Safaria website up here. When you go to this, I go to a verse, I can click translations, and I'm getting different translations. So let's see what they say God took. This is Melina's question.
Wasn't it a side, a rib?
Okay. So Everett Fox, 1995, says it was a rib. The same word in Hebrew can mean rib or side. Now, if it was side, which side do you think it was?
The right side?
My point is, right? Then it was half, right? Let's say right, left, let's say front, back, it was half. Um, right. So that's where they get this. That's the interpretation that they took a side. That's why the JPS says it as side. Um, a really good one here, I think is it, no, here, the Rashi Chumash. So the Rashi Chumash follows Rashi's interpretation. Rashi was the first commentator to go word by word through the Torah. God fashioned the side he'd taken from the man into a woman. So, does that answer your question, Melina? Okay. Um, okay. Um, I okay. So now Adam and Eve sin, and then they kind of play the blame game, but then God says, oh, really interesting thing about before they sin or after they sin, they heard the sound of God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day. And the human and his wife hid from God among the trees of the garden. So two things I wanted you to notice about this verse. Number one, have you ever heard the sound of God moving about? Right? So like in there's this idea that in the Garden of Eden, we can actually see God, hear God. Nowadays, God is hidden. So in our and actually we watched a video about this, I think, right around Hanukkah, where it talked about the miracles and how the miracles of Hanukkah, God's hand is hidden. So nowadays, God is hidden. We want to open our eyes to be able to see God in everything. Um, right? In the Garden of Eden, you could already see everything. When the Mashiach comes in Messianic time, according to the mystics, that's a time when we'll all see God. Um, so they hide. By the way, if God says, "Where are you?" What there? Who in the Torah does God call for? And they're like, "Here I am." Does anybody know? So Abraham, when God calls Abraham to sacrifice his son, Abraham says, "Here I am," and here instead they hide. Kind of the opposite reaction. Okay, so God asks Adam, "What happened?" Adam says, "Oh, I heard you in the garden. I was afraid. I was naked. I ate." God said, "Oh, it was that woman you put at my side. She gave me from the tree and I ate." So he blames her. God says to the woman, "What have you done?" She blames the serpent. "I was that serpent." God curses the serpent. God says to the woman, "I will expand your hard labor and your pregnancies. In hardship shall you bear children. Your urge will be for your husband. He shall rule over you." Adam says, "Because of what you did, because you did as your wife said and ate of the tree which I commanded you, shall not eat of it. Cursed shall be the ground because of you. By hard labor shall you eat it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you. Your food shall be the grass of the field. By the spread of your brow shall you get bread to eat, until you return to the ground. From it you are taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." So in other words, you're going to get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You're going to have to actually work for a living, and you're not going to be immortal. Um, so let me ask, does this imply original sin?
Can you explain your question?
So a lot of the Christian reading of this is that Adam and Eve's sin left a moral taint such that when we are born with some sort of moral taint. We're born with a negative bank account. Is that fair to say, those of you coming from the Christian world, that original sin means I'm born with kind of a negative balance in my bank account that I can never really get over?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, that's what I was taught
that.
in Christianity. Yes.
Right. So does
But
this
there's a
imply that?
problem with that.
Yeah.
There's a problem with that. How can something that is created by God be tainted?
Yeah. So let me ask, does this text imply that we're born with a negative balance in our spiritual bank account?
I don't think it really sounds like it implies that. It just
Yeah,
sounds
I don't.
they were the people who did, they were just people who sinned. And
Right. So they were people who sinned. It does mean that we have to like work for a living and we have to like plants don't grow for us and we don't get to live in the Garden of Eden and we're mortal. But it doesn't mean we're born with kind of some sort of terrible weight of sin that we need someone to take away for us. Yeah, Melina.
I have a question here. Is this belief that you said we are born with a negative bank account, something like that, is it not a little bit closer to the idea that we say we reborn to accomplish our mission and to
Good,
purify our souls,
good,
something like
good, good,
that?
good. Yes. So I think the Jewish alternative, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Sorry about that. So yeah, so we're not born sinful, but we are born imperfect. And our role in life is to perfect our soul. it's not necessarily, it's not like, oh, we're so horrible if we don't manage to perfect it. And because actually not very few of us do perfect it in our lifetime, and we get reincarnated over and over until we fully perfect it. And Mashiach comes when all of us perfect our souls. All of our souls are a spark of Adam's soul. So Adam Kadmon, the first man in mystic thought, actually had this soul that included all of humanity. And when Adam sinned, yeah, all of our souls are broken. We're all born imperfect and broken. And our job in life is to perfect that in order to bring the Messiah, try to bring Mashiach. And there's a phrase called tikkun olam, fixing the world. There's also a phrase called tikkun nefesh, fixing our soul. And our job in life is to fix our soul. Does that make sense? Now, and the Talmud actually comments on the notion. Now, it still does say, okay, we die, Adam and Eve brought death, right? So the Talmud says, you know what? There's only 6 people who ever died because of Adam and Eve's sin. And in other words, what it's saying is, by far, most of us, we have our own sins. You cannot blame what happens to you in your life on Adam and Eve, right? We've all got our own stuff, so don't blame it on them. Um, the other, the other thing I just want to point out is Satan showed up, right? The snake showed up, understood both by Christians and Jews as being Satan, Satan. Um, Serpent shows up. Um, it was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that God had made. It said, "Did God really say you may not eat of any tree?" She said, "We may eat any other tree, but not this tree." God said, "You shall not eat it or touch it, lest you die." The serpent said, "Oh, you won't die. God just knows as soon as you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like divine beings who know good and bad." So then she ate it. Yeah. Yes, Steve.
You know, the term Satan, I know is more of a Christian construct in terms of the what we think about. I believe like last week's Parsha, it actually, or the week before, referred to Satan again. And I'm very confused as to what is Satan from the Jewish thought.
Yeah, that's where
Because
I'm
again,
going.
kind of like someone else just said, if
That's
God
where I'm going.
created everything, everything is perfect, how can this thing exist?
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
And yeah, okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep. So Satan in Hebrew means the prosecutor. So Satan is the prosecuting angel, right? Like the DA. Um, right. Satan's job is to do investigations. What do they call it in America when they appoint like a special prosecutor, right? Satan is like the special prosecutor. Like Satan's job is to find fault, to try to poke any fault, any holes that he can. That's his job. In the book of Job, right? All the angels come up to God. God says to Satan, "Wow, Satan, look at Job. He's so amazing." And Satan's like, "Ah, yeah, yeah, but if you take away his stuff, he won't be so great." Right? So Satan is the accuser. Satan's just doing his job, not 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 actually like some sort of um yeah. And then the other thing they also say is um and in some ways um this is more of the Satan as evil kind of concept, that we all have some evil in our own. We all have Satan in our own souls. We have a part of us that tempts us to do bad things in our souls. So that's our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination. So not only is there this force in the world, but also in our own souls, trying to get us to sin, trying to get us to be lazy. I've even read sources that say, "Oh, if you think to yourself, why bother doing this? I'm not such a good Jew. Why bother wearing a tallis? I don't even keep kosher." That's Satan trying to get you not to do a mitzvah by discouraging you, by making you feel depressed. So not just this kind of outward evil, but even like depression or um, if you low self-esteem and those kind of things. Yes, Steve. Oh, I have a bunch of hands.
You answered my question.
Okay, excellent.
It was the
Jessica?
So is Satan or Satan seen as more of a, just a neutral doing their job, like as a prosecutor or as evil inside of all of us, or like a mixture of both? I'm a little confused there.
I mean, so I would say not every text is the same, right? And so you just have to look at a text you're dealing with and kind of what's its attitude, what's it saying. Um, the Yetzer Hara in us I mean, it's just a part of life too. We're born with it. Um, so when you read the book of Job and it talks about Satan, for sure, it's just doing its job. When you read the Zohar and it actually talks about Samael, it's a little more like it's evil and we have to fight it. The Yetzer Hara is evil and we have to fight it. Um, and it's a little less clear, like, why did God create Samael? Why did God create our Yetzer Hara? That's a little less clear. But yeah, in this case, though, in this text, though, right, the serpent is really temptation, which is just a part of life and testing us and doing its job. I want to move on because we've spent a long time on this. We'll do Parshat Noah next week. Um, okay. Oh yeah, Melina.
Can I ask something again about Satan?
Sure, of course.
This story that said Satan was an angel who said, "I won't bow to the Adam, and I won't follow you. I'm better than Adam because I'm made of fire. He's made of earth. Blah blah blah." This is not true.
So I've never heard that midrash. There's a lot of midrash, and they don't all agree with each other. So
Uh-huh.
I've never
Okay.
heard a midrash. I could believe that there's such a midrash out there, but they don't. You can't reconcile. They're different. They're just different stories that don't necessarily agree with each other. Steve's your hand up, or
No, how do I make it go down?
I'll do it. I'll do it for you. I did.
Uh,
Okay. Um. Okay. Here. Okay. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this song.
Hey, you! Who, me, Officer Krupke? Yeah, you! Give me one good reason for not dragging you down to the station house, you punk!
Dear kindly Sergeant Krupke, you gotta understand, it's just our bringing upkey that gets us out of hand. Our mothers all are junkies, our fathers all are drunks. Golly Moses, naturally we're punks.
Gee, Officer Krupke, we're very upset. We never
Okay. You guys familiar with that song?
Never.
Never. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let me pull those lyrics up so that yeah, let me pull the lyrics up. Here are the lyrics. Um, Dear kindly Sergeant Krupke, you got to understand, it's just our bringing upkeep that gets us out of hand. Our mothers are all junkies. They're all on drugs. Our fathers are all drunks. They're all drinking alcohol. Golly Moses, naturally we're punks. What's their argument? These are a bunch of gang members being arrested by a police officer. So what's their argument?
They're bad because their upbringing.
Yes, we are just bad because of our upbringing, and therefore what?
Really punk.
Not responsible.
We're not responsible. We can't help it, right? We don't truly have free will. So the Talmudian chapter, and I apologize, I didn't send it out on homework. He talks about free will as a fundamental belief in Judaism, right? The whole idea that God would want us to do things, that we would be rewarded for doing things, punished for not doing things. The whole idea of moral responsibility falls apart if we don't accept free will, if there's no idea of free will. Um, and free will seems like a kind of obvious thing to believe in, but in some ways, right, this song from West Side Story is an example of people essentially denying free will. About 5 years ago, here in Florida, down the road, there was a teenager from Parkland, and he shot up his high school. It was horrible. There was a couple hours, the whole place was locked down. Um, and he got off. He got off the death penalty. They didn't give him the death penalty. And one of the jurors said, well, with his childhood, it was inevitable. And I personally was very disturbed by this because that means, okay, on the one hand, I can understand that with a certain background, it makes it more likely to have certain behavior. But it's very dangerous to say that criminals can't help it, right? It gives them a complete free pass. So there is an idea. We talked earlier about how we're all born flawed. So there is an idea that we're born with predispositions, with what are called good or bad midot. So a midah is an ethical attribute, a personal attribute. That's a midah. Midot is the plural. So we're born with good midot and bad midot. Um, and sometimes we just develop bad habits. So we don't have free will, we don't have free will to just wake up and be entirely 100% different. But the Musar movement says we can train ourselves to gradually become different. That, and we're responsible for training ourselves. So I'm not responsible for the fact that I was born with a certain predisposition, right? This Parkland shooter isn't responsible for being born with a predisposition to, I don't know if it was to murder or what the predisposition was, but I'm responsible for doing something about it. Um, the and that's right, that's the whole purpose of life, is that tikkun hanefesh that we talked about before. Um, so how can we gradually change our those attributes? Anybody know? Yeah, Melina?
Actually, I am totally lost here.
Oh no.
I didn't get what you say. You say that we were born with good midah, bad midah. What do you mean?
Yes. So a midah is a moral attribute. Maybe I'm generous, maybe I'm stingy, maybe I'm patient, maybe I'm impatient, maybe I'm kind, maybe I'm mean. Each of those is right, either a good midah or a bad midah or somewhere in between. Maimonides says these are like a little like a speedometer, right? Each one of these you could have imagine a little gauge that says, okay, generous or stingy, here is kind or unkind, patient or impatient. And we can't suddenly turn that speedometer from 0 to 100, but we can push on the gas to change it. So if I see in myself, you know what, I really need to be more generous. Um, if I see to myself, I really need to be more generous, then what I can do is try to incline myself towards being more generous, to move the gauge on that midah. Does that make some more sense, Melina? Okay, thank you for asking. Um, so there's the Musar movement is this ethical improvement movement within Judaism. And they talk about number one, I can move the gauge by practicing that midah. So if I'm not very generous, I can practice being generous. Do one thing every day to practice being generous. I can also keep track at the end of my day of, when was I generous today? When was I not generous? That's a practice called cheshbon nefesh, which means soul accounting. So, in other words, I can essentially acquire free will, right? I don't have free will. So, there's one idea that, there's the things I would never do over here. There's the things I already do over here. And then there's the things where I can actually make a choice. And it's a pretty limited amount, but those are the things where I have free will. And I have to gradually do more and more of those things to take control over my life. So I acquire free will. It's not simply given, I can't simply wake up and be an entirely different person. Any comments on this concept of free will? Yeah, Ben, please.
Well, I mean, do we actually have free will? Because if God is present in all things, including us, then our choices are limited to those paths that He's already set before us. So it goes back to
Yeah.
not a lack of responsibility, but perhaps a responsibility to act responsibly.
Yeah. So the Talmud says, every everything is in God's hands. Everything is in the hands of God except fear of God, right? That I can't wake up and drive a Maserati. I can't wake up and live in $1 million home earning $300,000 a year or whatever it is. I can't. But right? I can wake up and think, okay, how can I be a kind, helpful, responsible person today? Right? Given who it is that comes into my life, given my life circumstances. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Well,
There's
we have a Zoom room full of people that have made a conscious choice, have we not?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, okay, so I'm moving on. The first chapter of Greenberg oh yeah, Melina, please.
Last question, sorry.
That's okay. Doesn't have to be
What
your last.
does do we believe in Judaism about destiny? Because when
Um,
Monsieur was talking, it really came into my mind. Is there a destiny for us to says that, for example, Melina should burn and do this?
so first of all, I mean, Pirkei Avot says, well, God, everything is foreseen, but we still have free will. So that's what Pirkei Avot says. That God knows what we're going to do. But in general, people the sources really reject the idea of destiny because destiny means I don't have free will. It means there's nothing I can do about my life. And the whole idea in Judaism is we have to make choices to make ourselves better and to make the world better. So the whole idea of destiny kind of is really goes against that. So and a lot of people say, okay, you're not supposed to go to fortune tellers because it makes it seem like there's nothing you can do. And there's always something you can do. So it kind of goes against the ethos of Judaism. Um, yeah, Ben, please.
I've just always thought that we reconcile ourselves against the potential of who we can be.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. We're right there. There's the story about the rabbi on his deathbed, and they're like, and he's crying. They're like, with students are like, why are you crying? You were just as great as Moses. And he's like, I'm not worried that when I die, God will ask me, why weren't you Moses? I think this was Levi Yitzchak. I'm worried when God dies, he'll ask me why I wasn't Levi, right? So yeah, we're judged against our potential, 100%. Um, okay, so I want to talk about Shabbat. Um, the, I want to share a white screen, whiteboard. Here we go. New whiteboard. Okay. Um, so Shabbat, um, I want to dive in, really starting looking at the different movements. So in Orthodoxy, they use the term Shomer Shabbat. What does that? Anybody know what that means?
Can I say?
Yeah, please.
Shomer Shabbat, Shomer in Hebrew means to guard.
Yep.
What means Shomer Shabbat means there are, if I don't make mistakes, 37 rules about the things that we shall not do. For
Yes.
example, we shall not
Had to.
take a car, we shall not turn off or turn on the lights, we shall not smoke cigarettes, blah 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 blah. I mean, we shall not smoke cigarettes because we are turning something, or we shall not use electricity, we shall not carry something. We shall not do so many things in Shabbat. Instead, we should study Torah and being with our family. And when someone respects this rule, even an Orthodox person told me we shall not talk about money and work. I don't know if it's correct or not, but I have heard it. And when someone respect this, from the time that they light the Shabbat candles till the time that they light Havdalah candles, we call them Shomer Shabbat.
Good. Great. Um, so the talking, by the way, is like generally it's not considered Shabbostic. It's not, but it's not one of the 39 labors. So it's 39 malachot. You were close, just off by two. It's 39 malachot and it's 25 hours, right? Sunset Friday night to when you see three stars on Saturday. So that's Shabbat orthodoxy, and we're going to get into the details. Anybody know what conservative Judaism says about Shabbat? Anybody know?
Well, I know there are exceptions, like you're allowed to drive a car if you're going to synagogue.
Yeah.
Is that what you
Drive.
mean?
Yeah. So it starts off from the basis of the same rules, but there are
Hmm.
some exceptions. You can drive to synagogue. They say you can use electricity. They say you can use musical instruments. Um, in conservative Judaism, what you'll find is that what people do on the ground isn't what rabbis say you're supposed to do. So I'm giving you the kind of rabbi's definition of conservative Judaism. You know, it's not the joke is that conservative Judaism is Orthodox rabbis and Reform congregants. So it's not necessarily that everyone in the synagogue will do this, but that is actually how conservative Judaism holds, is that you can drive to synagogue, you can use electricity, but it's starting from the same base of those 39 labors for 25 hours. Okay, Reform Judaism. Does anybody know what Reform says?
Reform seems like it really doesn't have that strict of any like restrictions. They just seem more of like observances, I guess. And like people can work. You know, a lot I've seen that a lot of Reform Jews don't even they're not even kosher or
Yeah. So,
there doesn't really seem to be any restrictions. It's just you know, kind of a choice if you want to go and attend a Shabbat service.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what I've
So
picked up.
So Reform Judaism believes that observance is a choice. You should see if it's meaningful to you, you do it. That's their approach on Shabbat. Um, right. Many, and in the Reform world, often when people say doing Shabbat, they only mean Friday night. Often that's just when they talk about Shabbat, what they mean. Um, Anybody know about a renewal approach? What renewal might say about Shabbat? So renewal Judaism,
Dear
I'll just
Raf David, sorry,
yeah,
I have never ever heard about the term that you said.
renewal. So
Yes, what
Is
is
that
yeah,
this?
is that different from Reconstructionist?
it is. All right, I don't. Okay, so renewal focuses on spirituality, tries to make things spiritually meaningful. They will often blend chanting, meditation, other forms of spiritual practice in. So they've asked the question, what would make it a day of spirituality? Right. That's like the renewal approach to Shabbat. And then so and then Reconstructionism. Um, Actually, Amelia, have you been you've been attending a Reconstructionist synagogue, right? I think you muted.
Yeah, they have a variety of programming they do for Shabbat. They have traditional Shabbat services that they have some weeks, and then other weeks they'll have like a bagel and Bible study group. Sometimes they'll have like a service and service where you go do community service. Other times they'll have something on Friday night, like a family potluck night.
Right.
Um,
I'm not asking about programming though. I'm asking about
oh,
what do they say as a Reconstructionist that one should or should not do on Shabbat?
um, I don't know. They do Zoom. They don't write on Shabbat. They
Okay.
do drive.
So
Um,
by the way, writing and driving are very different. Writing is a Torah prohibition.
yeah,
Driving, it's not clear is a Torah prohibition. So
yeah.
it's yeah,
But I don't know specifically what the rules. I mean, they seem
yeah.
to be different for different people.
Yeah. So Reconstructionism is a American movement that believed very much in democracy. So it believes in a kind of democratic approach. So it does not come out and say, okay, here's what people should do. It kind of leaves it up to communities. Um, so there are now, Melina, when you mentioned you talked about, okay, we don't do those things, but we do go to synagogue, study, family, have time with family. So on Shabbat, there's the negative, there's what you don't do, and there's the positive, what you do do. Okay? Um, this week we'll talk about the negatives. Those are the things we keep out of Shabbat. And next week we'll talk about the positives, what we are making room for. There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov that he asked God, he saw met the prophet Elijah. He said, "Am I going to heaven when I die?" Elijah says, "I don't know. It depends on you." He says, "Well, if I go to heaven, can you if I go to hell, show me who am I going to be hanging out with?" So he tells him where to go. He goes, finds this house, knocks on the door, says, "Can I spend Shabbos with you?" The guy is dressed all in black, looks very serious, nods, okay, doesn't talk to him at all. They go to synagogue. He walks, he's very serious. They come back. Um, Everybody sits very quietly at the table, and everything is completely kosher, completely Shomer Shabbos, and completely joyless. And this is who is his neighbor going to be if he goes to hell, right? The Hasidim often would think of hell. Okay, yes. Okay, well, what if I go to heaven? And he goes and he meets someone who does not keep kosher, doesn't go to synagogue, but Friday night he invites everyone in town over and they have a huge party with lots of alcohol. And the rest of Shabbos he doesn't daven, doesn't do it. So he asked this guy, like, what's your story? Why do you have this big party Friday night? He says, "Well, tell you the truth, my parents were Jewish and they were murdered by the Cossacks in a pogrom. And the only thing I remember about my upbringing and about being Jewish is that Friday night there was a party and there was drinking, there was wine. So that's the only thing I know about being Jewish. So every Friday night I have a huge party with lots of booze." And that was going to be his partner if he went to heaven, right? So the idea is that there's the prohibitions of Shabbat, the things we don't do, but if it's just those, it becomes this joyless shell. And the point of the prohibitions is to create space for the positives, right? So the second guy, there were none of the prohibitions. He didn't know any of the prohibitions, but it was all the positives. So on Shabbat, we have to have that balance both of what we don't do, what we keep out, and what that lets room for. There is a parallel between the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the and Shabbat. So do you guys know what the tabernacle looked like? Yeah,
What is Mishkan, dear Rav David?
good. That's what I'm going to show you. So the Mishkan is the word for tabernacle, which is not a great word in Hebrew. And in the desert, that was the thing they built in the middle of their camp. And it had these tents around it, and they would do the sacrifices inside of it. So this is the place where the divine presence dwelt. Anybody know why it had walls? Curtains, walls. Anybody know? So the inside of the Mishkan had to be pure. You can't have a sacrifice in an impure area. The presence of God dwells there. It has to be totally pure. Outside of the walls, it does not have to be pure all the time. You know, there's regular humans who live outside the walls. So the Mishkan is a sacred space that's created by keeping the other stuff out. So if you think about the parallel, Shabbat is a sacred space. We keep out, the stuff we keep out isn't bad. It's the stuff we keep out are just things we do during the week that aren't sacred. And that creates the space for something that's sacred. Does that make sense?
So
So
you're
the
not
book of,
saying it's the Holy of Holies. It's just that area that separates the world from the Holy of Holies.
well, the Mishkan is the whole area inside the walls, and the Holy of Holies inside inside the tent here.
Gotcha.
So I'm only taking the metaphor so far. I'm not sure how the metaphor goes in terms of Holy of Holies versus holy, but I'm saying the whole area here has to be pure. The whole area. So and the Torah itself draws a parallel between the building this Mishkan and Shabbat in a number of places. One of the things it says is it gives the commandment to build the Mishkan, and then it says, but on the seventh day you shall rest. So in other words, on Shabbat day, we can't build the Mishkan. So the rest of the week, we are making the world a dwelling place for God. Mishkan literally means dwelling place. So we're making the world a suitable place for God to dwell. And then on Shabbat, we're actually letting God dwell there. If you look at Shabbat in the Torah, um, the actually let's look at Shabbat in the Torah. Here. The heavens and earth were finished in all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that was undertaken. God ceased on the seventh day from doing any work. Um, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy. So, what's new on the seventh day?
That it was holy.
Yeah, holiness is new. I guess God blessed Adam and Eve, so maybe not blessing, but holiness, right? So there's a sacred presence on Shabbat that's not there the rest of the week. So the rest of the week we are trying to make the world an appropriate dwelling place for God, and on Shabbat we actually let it function in that way. So there are, Melina mentioned before, 39 prohibitions, called 39 malachot. And these are the same 39 things that were done building the Mishkan. Um, they, I mean, they also are, well, what else do they have in common? Take a minute, look at these, and I want you to think about what they have in common.
They all seem like they have physical labor tied to them.
Um, well,
Creating.
action, right? There's a physical action, right? I wouldn't, writing isn't necessarily laborious, but it's a physical action. Yes, it's creative, right? They create something. They change physical reality, right? Talking about business is definitely not a malacha. It may not be appropriate for Shabbat, but it's not a malacha, right? All of these are things that change our physical world. They're creative. Um, yeah. So, and yeah. So on that's why I read, like, we cook everything beforehand, and then on Shabbat it's just all there. Um, it's a it's a little challenging sometimes thinking about how do I translate this into the contemporary world. For people who are farmers, bakers, whatever, it's a little more obvious. When for some of us who never do any of these things, right, it's a little less obvious. But yes, Jessica.
I had a question, like, with all the prohibitions of Shabbat in Greenberg, like in the first chapter, they, they couldn't drive. They were talking about what they couldn't do in terms of the telephone. Like someone got their finger cut and they had to use like it was like a device, to call a doctor in to see if they could go to ER, and wasn't necessarily creating, but it was like they were prohibited or couldn't do these actions, like turning the lights off. They have the Shabbos lights that are on timers.
Yeah. Okay. So in the contemporary world, one of the biggest questions has been electricity. So looking at these labors, where does electricity fit in? Is it prohibited? Just forget what you know about Orthodoxy, Halacha, Judaism, whatever. Looking at these, can I turn on a light?
Well, it says igniting is under construction.
Okay, good. So igniting a fire. Now, is turning on a light igniting a fire?
It's the spark that's created during the circuit.
So in old electronics, like when electricity first came out, there was a spark that was thrown, and that was the argument that was given, that it actually did create a spark. Nowadays, professionally made electronics do not create sparks anymore. So that did used to be the case. But that certainly was one of the arguments that's the basis for Orthodoxy not using electricity. So, okay, so maybe a spark. What if there's no spark? I could still argue, and the conservative movement does. I could still argue that you can't turn on a light, but not because it's biblically prohibited. So, the Torah prohibition is making a literal fire. A fire is something. What's a fire? chemically? What does a fire do?
Consumes oxygen.
It consumes something. It consumes something, right? There's a hot process, and then it actually consumes what's burning. Now, with a light, nothing's burning, so it's not a biblical prohibition. But this is the conservative approach. But it does the same function as fire, so it's a rabbinic prohibition. So there's this idea that you have biblical rules, but then sometimes there's things that are close enough. So we say, you know what, the rabbis prohibit it because it's so close to a Torah prohibition. Another one you all are familiar with is chicken and milk. The Torah doesn't mentions meat and milk. It does not mention chickens and milk. The rabbis in the Talmud add, you know what, we're going to consider chickens to be meat. We're going to consider birds to be meat, and we don't eat meat. We don't eat chicken and milk. You can't have a kosher, chicken parmesan with real chicken. But that's rabbinic. It's not biblical. So we might say that rabbinically, it's like igniting. I think it's a I think it's a really hard argument to claim that electricity is biblically prohibited. I think it's a very difficult. Personally, I think it's a hard argument to make. But it is such a custom in the Orthodox world that like no one's going to say, "Oh yeah, you can use electricity on Shabbat." So, but that's one of the classic things where this comes up. By the way, I have a real problem with this idea that you would not call a doctor, and a lot of sources say you should never hesitate to call a doctor because health comes first. Um, I was in the hospital with my wife when she had given birth. The doctor walked in, Jewish doctor, observant Jewish doctor in Los Angeles, and she was writing a prescription on Shabbat. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And then I realized, oh yeah, she's a doctor. Like she's supposed to do that. Like the postscripts say, like we want doctors to completely do their thing on Shabbat because we don't want someone risking their life. Any other questions about this list? So and I would just say, like, we're not going into great detail in this list. It's worth going into detail for yourself if you're interested in applying these, because the details get much more complicated. So for instance, if you look at sorting over here, sorting, the definition of sorting in the Talmud is selecting the bad from the good. So actually going through your old clothes to find stuff to get rid of, decluttering is sorting, right? So there's a lot of details you might not think of looking at the list that really do require going into. Sorry. Okay, questions about the list? Yes, Melina.
Question. I have two questions. First question is the liberal movement. Maybe you have heard about it because near me we have so many synagogues which called liberal movements, and they are not orthodox, they are not conservative. What they are?
That's the same as conservative in America. I think that's either conservative. No, Masorti is conservative, liberal is reform. So in Europe, liberal is American reform.
Other question is about, would you mind after the class send us a link or a list what exactly conservative believes? Because when you were talking, I was searching the internet and there were so many resources that it was not a list. What should we do as a conservative Jew, for example,
What the conservative Jew believes about Shabbat or about everything?
Exactly. No, about Shabbat.
I don't even know. They came up with a good book finally. Um, I don't even know. I don't know of a resource that kind of really covers that, to be honest. There's a really good book. It's very dense. Um, I don't even know if it's on my bookshelf. Um, but I apologize. I don't have that at hand. Um, I don't.
No rush. Whenever it comes to you or you
Okay,
have
yeah,
an
no,
idea.
if I find it, yeah. And if you find one, please share it with me and I'll share it with everyone. Ben, you have your hand up?
Yeah, when I was looking at your list, it reminded me of something I remember reading in Steinsaltz, where he said that the separation goes back to separating yourself from those things to which you are a slave, using the Sabbath to do that. And he actually used the example of a light switch. When we're in the dark, we desperately grasp for the light switch. And so, It brought all that back. That if you think
Okay.
you're not a slave to electricity, you're badly fooled.
Okay. A lot of people in the liberal and even non-observant world, by the way, push for Shabbat unplugged. In other words, no computers, no phones, right? Because a kind of byproduct of not using electricity is, hey, like I can be present for the people in my life and not be constantly distracted by my phone and by TV and by the radio. So, and you see this in the renewal and other places coming to this same prohibition for a completely different reason. So I do like that. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
in my situation, 24/7 on call, you want a day where you're not on call. And so
Yeah,
that's one way to do it. I'm not answering my phone. You'll have to call me later. There's some numbers that are emergencies. It cannot be avoided, but separation is the essence of Shabbat.
right, right. Good. And just by the way, besides the 39 labors, there's something called muktsa, which are things that are set aside only for Shabbat use. So for instance, or non-Shabbat use. So for instance, money, you're not allowed to pick up and handle money. Anything else that's like a flashlight or candles or anything else that's only specifically the weekday that's not allowed to use on Shabbat, you can't move it on Shabbat. Um, Root, there's something, so I might have used this phrase before, oh, it's just not Shabbostic. So for instance, when Melina talked about discussing business, it's not a malacha, right? Doing business is a malacha. Talking about it isn't, but it's just not Shabbostic. It's not in the spirit of Shabbat. In Hebrew, it's called Shvut. So there is something called like the spirit of Shabbat. And it gets very tricky because it's like, well, what about basketball? Right? I love going outside playing basketball with with my 9-year-old daughter. I rarely get to do it during the week. So, um, some people would argue, well, it's exercise. That's not restful. Therefore, it's not in the spirit of Shabbat. But I know plenty of Orthodox people who will go out and play basketball with their children on Shabbat because the spirit of Shabbat is playing with your children. So it's tricky because it comes down to the question of, well, what is the spirit of Shabbat, right? Um, and actually, there's a Orthodox rabbi in my neighborhood who I just found out goes on a 16-mile bike ride every Shabbat afternoon. Because it's beauty, it's enjoyment, it's doing those things, it's not being a slave to all those responsibilities that he has during the week. The last thing I wanted to mention about this is asking a non-Jew called a Shabbos goy. So there's a lot of places where if there's something you can't do, people will ask a non-Jew to do it. Um, it's actually a lot trickier than people think. The Talmud the Talmud does talk about asking non-Jews to do work on Shabbat, only in the context of it as a prohibition. In other words, in the Talmud, there's a prohibition on asking a non-Jew to do work for you on Shabbat. That's just something you're not allowed to do. What you are allowed to do is drop a hint if they want to do something for themselves and then you benefit from it, that's fine. So I was in Brooklyn on a very hot Friday night, and there was this group that met late after they put their kids to bed, they would come and meet. And this was a group of Hasidic and ultra Orthodox people kind of questioning ultra Orthodoxy. They're very interesting thinkers. And it was a hot night, and the air conditioner broke. And there was who are those guys from Utah? I think a Mormon or Church of Latter-day Saints, one of those people who go around proselytizing. And this guy happened to be there, not proselytizing, just like studying Torah with them and discussing, and the air conditioner accidentally got unplugged. So all these guys are dropping hints to this non-Jew. They're like, "Oh, is it too hot in here for you?" And he's trying to be accommodating, so he keeps saying, "Oh no, I'm fine. I don't mind at all." And all these Jews are like, "Are you sure?" Because they couldn't come out and say, "Hey, we can't plug it in. It would be great if you could." Um, so you're actually not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do things for you. But as I said, if they make in the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, um, the neighbor makes a pot of coffee on Shabbat, and every Shabbat, he goes over and has coffee with his neighbor every Shabbat. Um, okay.
I have a
Any other?
question.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a question of my mom. Asked me maybe around 10 years ago. She asked me something. She asked me, for example, the day that you become Jewish, and we want to visit you, and we imagine that you are guarding the Shabbat, okay? Because they know about the things. Am I allowed to cook for you, or in the house that you are doing Shomer Shabbat, we cannot do anything?
So so there's technically and what I would do personally. So technically, um, if they want to cook for themselves, they can. And if they cook for themselves and you eat some of it, that's fine too. I would never do that. I don't want anybody cooking in my place on Shabbat. That just doesn't feel Shabbostic.
So last question. In a home that someone is Shomer Shabbat, anything which prohibited, nothing should be done. No matter
What do
if
you mean?
it's a Jew, it's a non-Jew. If, for example, I respect not to using electricity, even if someone who is not Jewish with me and he wants to use electricity, is not allowed. It's not okay.
So
Yeah.
again, he is allowed. He is allowed, but I personally would not want them to. So
I get
yeah,
that.
right. Because if he does that, he hasn't broken it, that's just him. You haven't broken any rules. But for me, that would kind of break up my Shabbat environment.
Thank you.
Okay. And of course, now, of course, I'm trying to present kind of full Orthodox slash conservative observance. Um, right. Not expecting that anybody has to, your path is your path. So I'm not, please don't feel like I'm, that's how I present it in this class, but then ultimately, you would decide on your path. Okay. Um, by the way, there's a number of great books on this. Um, I will send you out the title of one I love. It's actually a picture book that gives examples and pictures of all of these 39 malachot. Okay, so last week we learned about the Shema, and the Shema is this prayer from Deuteronomy that we say 2 times a day. Did you guys practice saying it? I know Ben, you told me you already do it, and no, somebody else told me they do it anyway.
Oh yeah. Twice a
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Did you guys practice it or?
Yeah, we practice and
Good.
doing
Good.
it.
Good. How was that?
Good.
Good.
Good. Try and teach it
So,
to the
when we talk about the Shema, right? There's the one line of the Shema, but the traditional phrase, reading the Shema, is 3 paragraphs. There's 3 paragraphs to it. The sentence that you've been saying, that's the first sentence of the first paragraph in Deuteronomy. So the Veahafta is the rest of that same paragraph in Deuteronomy. And here's what it says. It can be read in English, it can be sung. There's a nice version sung in English by Debbie Friedman that I'll share with you guys. But when we say it's a mitzvah to say the Shema, it's actually a mitzvah to say the entire 3 paragraphs twice a day. So however much you do, great. But the next couple of sessions, we're gonna go into the rest of this first paragraph and the other 2 paragraphs of the Shema. So the Veahafta, this is the rest of that first paragraph. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day. Impress them on your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you're away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The rest of this, by the way, I'm ignoring for now. The Reform movement took the end of the third paragraph and attached it to the first paragraph. So right now I'm just doing the Veahafta. What mitzvot do you see here?
Tefillin.
Okay, good. So it says, bind them as a sign on your hand and a symbol before your forehead. Those are tefillin. Good. What's
Oh,
this here?
and the mezuzah.
Yes, write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. That's the mezuzah. Recite them when you stay at home. Okay, recite them when you lie down and when you get up. What's that? That's the mitzvah of saying the Shema, right? Saying the Shema when you lie down, when you rise up. And teach them to your children. What mitzvah is that? So it's a mitzvah to teach Torah to our children, right? That's a mitzvah. Not it's by the way, it's not a mitzvah to send our kids to Hebrew school, right? I feel like in our society, people think like they think very kind of, you know, the mitzvah is to make sure your kids know Torah. So if they go to Hebrew school and they don't know Torah, you're not doing your job. And if they do, if they don't go to Hebrew school but you're teaching Torah, great. But that we are supposed to teach them Torah. I remember a Shabbat rabbi say, and it really made an impression on me, that if parents would study for 15 or 30 minutes with their kids every night, that would that would completely transform, the educational level of our Jews. That's a way to make them educated Jews. So even if they're going to, right, with my kids, I try to do ideally a little bit of Torah study every day, at least a couple times a week. Okay, love God with your heart, your soul, and your might. So it says all your heart. They say when it says all your heart, why does it say the word all? Was that add? You know? So
no room for, I guess, other, distractions. You see, you know what I mean?
So in other words, don't allow distractions, you're saying.
Or like by distractions, I'm really meaning like, Lashon Hara, ill thoughts, etc.
Oh, okay. So love God with. So what does it mean to love God with all your heart? Just play that out. I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
So if your heart is all your heart is loving God, then there's no room in your heart left over for things that are not godly.
I see. Okay, I like that. The traditional way to understand this is even with the negative parts of our heart, even with our Yetzer Hara, that we have negative parts, and even using those to serve God. With all your soul, they say even if God takes your soul, right? Even so, being faithful, even if it means it costs us our life. Halachically, there's only three sins for which we are martyred, and we refuse to do them, even to the point of being martyred. Anybody remember what the three things are? So it's murder, incest, and idolatry. Those are the three biggest sins in Judaism. So but there's a classic story about Rabbi Akiva who was killed for studying Torah. And he when he died, he said the Shema smiling, because he said, "This is the first opportunity I've had to love God with all my soul." And with all your might, there's a lot of interpretations, but one of the interpretations is all your money, meaning being Judaism, having integrity, living our values can cost us money, but we serve God with all our money, with whatever we need to. So I'll give you a taste of the way this is chanted. Let me make sure. Yes. So it's chanted to the way the Torah is chanted.
Veahafta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך.
So, and often in a lot of synagogues, it's chanted out loud in that way. Another beautiful, and by the way, we have here a nice video with it if anybody wants to learn it this way. This series, Prarioke, is a wonderful series. She puts up these prayers and has the transliteration and translation while she does it. So it's really nice. But Debbie Friedman, yeah, Yep. So I'll send you guys links to those two. So if you want to learn it, in the chanted in the Hebrew, chanted sung in the English, either way is great. Okay. So for homework, Parshat Lech Lecha, Greenberg chapter 1, Talishkin 3 to 5. Any other questions or anything before we go? Okay. So see you guys next week.